Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Yep. Views of the speakers are those of the speakers. Let me try that again. Views expressed are those of the speakers, yes. And not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, or, as we like to say on this show, UPTV, because we are also on UPTV. We're everywhere. Everywhere you are and everywhere you want us to be, or something like that. Anyway, so I haven't been on I have not done the radio version of this show for a while. For a variety of reasons, mostly because I didn't feel like it. Yeah, I know you're saying, like, what? How dare you not feel like it? I'm just being honest with you here. I mean, I could say, oh, I've been really busy and blah, 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 and I have been. But, it was winter. It's warmer now. And it was just like, you know what? I just don't feel like going across town, setting all my stuff up, doing the show. I just didn't. So I didn't do it. I found other ways. You UPTV viewers, you've been seeing us weekly as usual because of the magic of something. The magic of repeats and things like that. But the radio listeners have had to do without, and I'm sure you probably felt terrible, you were missing it, and all that stuff. But in any event, I'm back tonight. It's an awful lot. I'm here like 3 nights a week. I do 4 radio shows a week. It just, sometimes I get tired of doing these things. So I apologize in case you were like, in case you tuned in and you were like, I really want to hear some more ranting about immigration. Where is that guy that likes to rant about immigration? If that is the case, then I apologize for not being here. But, that's how it goes. So I am here tonight, as you might imagine. And lots going on in the world. A lot of the news lately is about coronavirus. I'm sure you've been following that, like we all have. It's an interesting thing. Interesting. Maybe not the right word. But it is interesting to just, like, find yourself at a turning point in history, It could be a huge turning point. It could be a smallish turning point. But it is a turning point, nonetheless, because we have a new disease, which is similar in a lot of ways to things that have been around before, but it is actually different. So, that's strange. That's new. That's not, that doesn't happen very often. And so it's really something to, aside from worrying about it and being afraid and trying to make plans and doing all these things, it's also something to, like, really sit back and go, wow, I've never done this before. I've never experienced this. I was alive around for SARS and for, what was the other one? Pork virus, whatever that was, swine flu, all these different things. I mean, there have been new diseases that have come and gone in my lifetime, but this one is kind of a bigger one because it's apparently quite a bit more contagious than those, and I guess maybe that's the real difference. It's a bit more contagious. And the scientists are quite a bit more worried about it. In the past, on some of those other things, they were like, oh, this could be bad. We'll see. This one is like, yeah, it's bad. start to worry. And, you don't hear that too many times in your life. So it is, aside from the tragedy that has been the current administration, the results of the last election, and everything that's happened since. And I say that I'm not being hyperbolic there when I use that word. I think it has been a tragedy for the world. There have been several elections around the world, in Brazil, UK, other places that have been tragedies. I mean, they've been terrible for a lot of people. A few people have benefited, and a lot of people have suffered. And history is going to be brutal about this period of time. When it looks back, it's really going to. It'll probably sound a lot worse than it's been. It'll be like living through, the French Revolution or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, it'll possibly get worse before it gets better. So same thing with the coronavirus. A lot of different things are maybe probably going to get worse before they get better. And those of us who are just trying to, exist through these times, well, not just trying to. I mean, some of us are trying to do more than just exist. We fight back, and we're striving to improve things and to change things. But, in the meantime, existing is also on the table. So we just have to bide our time and realize that all things change eventually. And so anyway, that's my coronavirus update and philosophical moment here at the CU Immigration Show. Kind of shows, I had sort of a theme for the show, and then there's some other stuff to put on there, so it's not too terribly theme-like, but I'll start with this bit because this just happened. Those of you who follow immigration stuff are familiar with the name of Ken Cuccinelli, and this is an interesting turn of events. We'll see what it amounts to, but we have an article here entitled, "Judge Says Ken Cuccinelli Was Appointed Unlawfully to Top Immigration Post." A number of people have said this at the time, and it finally went through the courts and, has an official stamp on it. But anyway, I will read it to you quickly. A federal judge ruled on Sunday that Ken Cuccinelli's appointment to a top immigration position in the Trump administration was unlawful, saying several directives issued by Cuccinelli to tighten asylum rules must now be set aside. In a 55-page ruling, U.S. District Judge Randolph Moss said the administration violated the Federal Vacancies Reform Act when it tapped Cuccinelli in June 2019 to lead U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the agency within the Department of Homeland Security that oversees legal immigration into the country. The ruling invalidated a pair of directives issued by Cuccinelli, an immigration hardliner and the former Attorney General of Virginia, that introduced new restrictions on the asylum process. The first directive shortened the length of time asylum seekers have to prepare for credible fear interviews with officials from 48 or 72 hours to one full calendar day from the date of arrival at a detention facility. With the second, Cuccinelli prohibited asylum officers from granting extensions to this new policy, except in the most extraordinary of circumstances. On the merits, the court concludes that Cuccinelli was not lawfully appointed to serve as acting director, and that, as a result, he lacked authority to issue the reduced time to consult and prohibition on extensions directives, Moss wrote in his ruling. Under the 1998 Vacancies Law, when a Senate confirmed leader of a federal office resigns, it falls to the first assistant of that vacant office to assume responsibility on an acting basis. But Cuccinelli didn't work at USCIS prior to leading it. Instead, the acting head of DHS at the time, Kevin McAleenan appointed Cuccinelli to serve as the principal deputy director of USCIS, a position that did not exist prior to Cuccinelli's appointment, the judge noted. Then McAleenan changed the order of succession to make the principal deputy director the first assistant, allowing Cuccinelli to leapfrog the existing deputy director to become the agency's acting director. Here, the acting secretary created a position that is second in command in name only, the judge wrote. The Trump administration, of course, is expected to appeal the decision. In an email, a spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security said, "We obviously disagree with the court's decision and will be looking closely at the decision." Sunday's ruling stemmed from a case brought by immigrant advocacy groups. Why is that word difficult? Advocacy. Immigrant advocacy groups on behalf of 5 asylum seekers from Honduras. The asylum seekers say Cuccinelli's directives did not give them adequate time to speak with lawyers and family members about their cases before they met with asylum officials. Immigration officers found that the asylum seekers, 2 women and 3 children, did not have a credible fear of persecution. Both women separately said they had been raped and faced other violence back in Honduras. All 5 were then subject to orders for expedited removal. But Moss said because Cuccinelli did not have the authority to issue the directives, the women's credible fear determinations would be vacated and they would not face expedited removal until a legally sufficient interview occurs. To be sure, the court has concluded that the 2 directives are invalid and must be set aside, Moss wrote. It remains unclear what the ruling might mean for Cuccinelli, who still leads USCIS and in November became the second highest official at the Department of Homeland Security. A vocal supporter of President Trump, Cuccinelli has drawn attention for his controversial rhetoric around immigration. In an August interview with NPR, he twisted Emma Lazarus's famous words on a bronze plaque at the Statue of Liberty, changing the quote to say, "Give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge." Democracy Forward, one of the groups involved in the lawsuit, called the decision both a victory for the rule of law and a significant blow to the Trump administration's xenophobic agenda. "We are proud to share this legal victory with the brave asylum seekers who brought the Trump administration to court to ensure that the United States stays true to its tradition of providing a haven for those fleeing persecution and seeking asylum in America," said Ann Harkavy, the group's executive director. So, I mean, this was, in the ordinary course of things, this was a foregone conclusion. I mean, it was obvious that this entire process was created to put this guy in place, knowing he couldn't be confirmed by Congress. And so it's just another one of the ways that the Trump administration has attempted to just bypass laws, systems, methods, procedures, everything it wants to in order to get what it wants the way it wants it. And so, I mean, this show isn't going to be all about Trump directly, but more about how the hardliners in this administration, and of course Trump himself, and around the world, are working the system to get the results they want, even though they can't convince enough legislators to go along with the entirety of their anti-immigrant plans. So keep that in mind as I read the title of this next piece, which will, kind of seem contradictory. But the next article is entitled, "How the Trump Administration Uses the Hidden Weapons of Immigration Law." Okay, so we're starting at home here. But anyway, this is not entirely about Trump or his administration, although that they are some of the worst offenders and the ones that we are the most concerned with at this time, because this is where we live. And our friends and relatives are being harassed by these people. Anyway, so how the Trump administration uses immigration law. In the first week of Trump's presidency, the administration issued a travel ban aimed at 7 predominantly Muslim countries. The outcry was swift and immediate, with protesters showing up at airports and many Republicans criticizing the decision. In June 2018, a third version of the ban was given a green light by a divided Supreme Court. The first 2 versions had been blocked by lower courts. Last month, the administration extended the ban on immigrant visas to 6 more countries: Nigeria, Eritrea, Kyrgyzstan, Myanmar, Sudan, and Tanzania. This time, there were no large nationwide protests and no signs of unease from Republican politicians. The story hardly registered amid an impeachment trial and the Democratic primary campaign. I, the author of the piece, not me, recently spoke by phone with Aaron Rechlin-Melnick, the policy counsel at the American Immigration Council, about Trump's increasing success in reshaping American immigration policy, from the travel bans to the crackdown on migrants trying to claim asylum at the Mexican border. During our conversation, which has been edited for length and clarity, we also discussed why the security-based rationales for the travel ban excuse me, sneezing. I'm not sick. I was sawing wood today, so my nose is full of sawdust, even though I was wearing a mask. And I'm snuffly. Please forgive me for sneezing in your direction. Let me continue. During our conversation, which has been edited for length and clarity, we also discussed why the security-based rationales for the travel ban aren't sound, whether a Democratic president would be able to quickly reverse most of Trump's changes, and the Remain in Mexico policy, which Rechlin-Melnick described as a stain on the rule of law. American immigration history tends to be broken down by eras. When you look at immigration policy over the past 3 years, do you think we are in a new era? The response as follows. I'm not sure it's a new era because much of what the Trump administration has done has been to find the hidden weapons in existing immigration law and then use them to the full extent, which no one had ever imagined would ever be done. If anything, what we're seeing now is the full extent of the last era of immigration coming to its fruition. By that I mean the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, or the IIRIRA. So much of what the Trump administration has done is to take things created in that act that had never been used and use them. And I don't know if we're in a new era because it's hard to say that all of these changes are going to stick. So it's a little too early to say era yet, I hope. Question. Is the Trump administration taking or trying to take steps that will move them beyond working with the existing paradigm, which I assume was formed by both the 1996 law and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security? Are they content to work within those frameworks and push them to the very limits of legality, or are there plans to move beyond that? And the answer is, the Trump administration wants to move beyond the current paradigm, and they are taking a lot of steps that push the boundaries of what's already on the books, to create loopholes that let them push beyond what the law says. There's a reason that so many of the Trump administration's policies have been blocked in court, and even some of them have been resuscitated by the Supreme Court and are currently in effect. There's so much more that's been blocked that barely even makes the national news. To a large extent, what the Trump administration has done on immigration that goes beyond the current paradigms has been through a series of international agreements with Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which have reshaped the structure of who's arriving at the southern border in ways that it is still too early to tell what the ultimate effect will be. In many ways, Mexico is the wall for a lot of the people who are arriving at the southern border or who want to flee to the United States to seek asylum. Mexico has become the wall. Question. Yes, you hear a lot of jokes on social media and late-night shows about Trump not getting his wall or the wall not being built at the speed that he expected. But it seems like that may be missing the forest for the trees. Can you explain what you mean by Mexico being the wall? The answer is, I think that misses the point for 2 reasons. The first reason is that as much as the Trump administration is mostly installing new wall in places where there were Where there previously were border barriers, there's a huge difference between a 4-foot-high vehicle barrier and a 30-foot-high steel bollard wall. What we're seeing is new fences going up in places across the southern border that are going to have huge effects on local communities and on the environment. It is cutting off pathways for endangered species like ocelots and other non-endangered species that have crossed border migratory patterns in ways that the previous barriers didn't do. On the point about Mexico, the Trump administration has, in many ways, strong-armed several governments to get them to stop people from ever even making it to the southern border. Until recently, tens of thousands of people annually would come through Guatemala and through Mexico, and then arrive at our southern border and seek asylum. A lot of the migration towards the U.S. has been limited by non-U.S. actors, by the brand new Guatemalan Border Patrol that the United States helped create, and by the Mexican National Guard, and through a series of regional pacts that the U.S. spent an enormous amount of effort negotiating over the past 2 years. Whether these pacts are going to last past the Trump administration remains to be seen, but right now it's harder than ever for people who are seeking to come to the U.S., who aren't Mexican, to get to the border. Question: what is your biggest fear about the long-term impact of this? Is it the humanitarian consequences, or is it a legal issue? Answer: it's a combination of both. We've created an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe at the U.S.-Mexico border through the creation of the so-called Migrant Protection Protocols, one of the most Orwellian names for a program that the U.S. has ever run. The Department of Homeland Security says this is a program to increase access to court hearings, but, in reality, what it is doing is forcing 62,000-plus asylum seekers to wait in appallingly dangerous conditions with no hope that they'll ever have the opportunity to get a lawyer and virtually impossible chances of ever winning asylum, regardless of the strength of their claims. We know that hundreds of people have been subject to kidnappings and have become the victims of serious crimes like rape, torture, and other really horrific things that the Trump administration effectively is using as a deterrent. At the same time that these programs are doing damage to the people who are going through them, they're also doing damage to the rule of law. Fundamental to a fair system is respecting people's rights to have a fair day in court. Yet what we're seeing is the Trump administration effectively ending the asylum system in the United States by making it impossible for anyone to win through structural obstacles as well as legal obstacles. Trump banned asylum for the vast majority of people who are arriving at the southern border through 2 separate asylum bans, one of which got blocked and the other one which is currently in place. They've made it impossible for anyone to ever get in touch with a lawyer. As a former immigration lawyer, winning an asylum case is extraordinarily difficult without a lawyer because the immigration court process is filled with pitfalls. Rather than do the responsible thing and put up signposts to help people navigate those pitfalls and make it through the system and have a fair day in court, the Trump administration has spent the last year digging as many new pitfalls as they can and filling them with snakes. And that's not even getting into the asylum cooperative agreements, which are another example of effectively running roughshod over the rule of law. Congress created the Safe Third Country Agreements with the idea that it would be used in a responsible manner, that we would send asylum seekers to other countries where they would be safe and where they would have access to full and fair asylum systems. Instead, we have effectively bullied Central American governments into taking other countries' asylum seekers, with full knowledge that no one from Honduras is going to seek asylum in Guatemala because Guatemala sends more asylum seekers to the U.S. borders than Honduras. It makes no sense to ask somebody to seek asylum in a country that hundreds of thousands of people are leaving every year, and yet, in spite of all of the evidence, that's what we're doing. Question: I want to talk about the newest version of the travel ban, which was released on January 31st. The first one went through 3 iterations before it became legally acceptable. What is different about the legal case that the administration is making for this new one? The answer is it remains to be seen whether the new ban is going to face the same kind of legal challenges as the first one. It's worth noting that the rationale the administration offered for the first ban was keeping out terrorists. But what they choose to do with this latest version is only ban people from immigrating permanently to the United States. The logic has never held up on these. Under the current travel ban, a person can get a tourist visa from Nigeria and fly to the United States, but a person who has a husband or wife in the United States and is seeking to move here to be with that family member is blocked from entering. Ironically, Umar Farouk Abdullah Muttalib, the underwear bomber, was the one person from Nigeria who has ever been accused of terrorist attacks against the United States. He came here on a tourist visa and would not have been blocked under this current ban. So what we're left with is a nationality-based immigration restriction, and we have seen this in American history before. From 1924 to 1965, the United States had what was known as the National Origins Quota System, a fully racist system which was designed to keep America at the ethnic makeup of the 1890 census, which was directly responsible in many ways for keeping out Jews during the era the Nazis came to power, and which was roundly rejected in the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which was, at the time, treated like a third Civil Rights Act because it effectively eliminated the one remaining national immigration restriction, which treated entire parts of the world as inferior. Unfortunately, we're moving back in that direction. Question: can you construct an argument that these bans are sincere attempts to pursue a policy that you, Aaron, may abhor? Or a policy with some sort of policy goal beyond racism and bigotry? Or do you feel that there is no actual defense of them beyond that? Because if the goal was something other than that, there's just no possible argument they would have been constructed in the ways they've been constructed. The answer: I'm not an expert on Nigeria's identity management systems, so I can't evaluate the extent to which the administration's arguments about any perceived inadequacies in those systems exist. At the heart of that ban, as well as the bans against Iran and other countries in the first travel ban, it is the inherent contradiction between only banning people who come on immigrant visas and not banning, by and large, people who come on non-immigrant visas, students, tourists, and others. If the goal truly was national security and preventing terrorists from coming to the United States, you would want to have a targeted and specific system that focused on those most likely to cause harm. Here we have a system that bans a 5-year-old child and an 80-year-old grandparent as much as it does everyone else. These blanket restrictions on countries just don't hold up logically and never have held up logically. So while I can't comment on whether those countries truly do have inadequate identity verification systems, this blanket ban effectively means that 6.5% of the entire world's population faces some form of nationality-based immigration restriction that clearly is not about national security. Question: is there one particular thing that you think the press doesn't cover much and that has had a huge impact? And the answer is, I think the big picture with the Trump administration's immigration policy is that it's almost impossible to know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and that they are willing to take every step, no matter how small,